I'm a lifelong Southerner married to an Indian man who grew up in South Africa during apartheid, and I am fiercely proud of both. If you don't like that, well, bless your heart. I'm Sheryl Parbhoo, and this is Southern Life, Indian Wife. Jessica, I just wanted to welcome you to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, so I'm excited to connect with you because you and I are so similar in many ways and different in many ways because of our lives and our families. We're both married to Indian men. We are both white American women. We both have kids. And we both have podcasts that we talk about our intercultural experience, which is always an experience, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but pretty much that's where the similarities end, I think, because just because we're both married to Indian men doesn't mean things are the same. But we have a lot of things to talk about.
For sure.
Yeah. So first of all, just kind of, give me a background of where you're from, where you're living now.
Yeah. So I'm from Chicago in the U.S., and my husband is originally from Bihar. It's a state in eastern India.
Okay.
And it's kind of known to be a more downtrodden place. It has a poor reputation in India. And usually when people hear that you're from Bihar, people kind of snuff their nose at you like, oh, can anything good come out of that place? And I can tell you that it certainly can. And actually, the longer that I'm here, I really see how great the people are and how much potential this place really has and how much growth is happening. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of his background is a bit, coming from a place that's not known as a metropolitan area whatsoever. For many years, it was kind of known as the most corrupt state in India and the poorest state in India. So that's kind of where he comes. Yeah, that's kind of where he comes from. And we met actually, we technically met when I was working in India. I'm a marketing professional by trade, and I was in my early 20s, and I had gone to India for this assignment, and I was working there for a couple of years, and I had learned Hindi in that city where I was living. It was this wonderful experience for a young 20-something girl, and
yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah, living outside of metropolitan India was an awesome experience. So basically, I had this incredible cross-cultural experience living in India. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, my husband had moved to the U.S. in his own cross-cultural experience into southern Indiana.
Oh, wow.
Right. So he had gone on the border of Kentucky.
Oh,
yes.
That's even more of a culture shock.
Yes. So he had gone from, living in India, and he had actually gone to college in a larger city in Pune. And it was a very multicultural experience for him in that city. He hung out with people from many different countries, and he had roommates from Ethiopia and Bahrain and the US and from all over the place. So he had that kind of multicultural experience before he moved to the US. And then he moves to southern Indiana, which is anything but multicultural.
Right. That's about as white bread as it comes.
Right. So that's the juncture in life where he and I connected.
Okay.
And I was in India and he was in the US. And a friend introduced us. We were both volunteering with the same organization, except I was with the India branch and he was with the US branch. And a friend introduced us, and you don't know Abhishek yet? You've never met him? No.
Uh-huh.
So we connected, and the rest is history. So when I had come back to the U.S., my assignment had actually finished up, and so we met face to face. So the short answer of like how we met, which is actually not what you asked.
No, but I was going to. I wanted to know. Yeah. So that's really good that you guys were both able to experience each other's culture before you met, because that's really different from what it was like when my husband and I met.
Sure.
Because he was born in South Africa. He's never been to India, but he grew up in this tight little Indian community. And we met in Memphis, Tennessee, and I was just a little Southern girl, and I still to this day have never been to India or Africa. Mm-hmm. It's not my world. So he had to make a lot of changes.
Sure.
Living in the South. And it was hard for me though, because I was living in the South in my world. And yet when I was in his family and with his Indian community, it was like being in another world, in another country.
Sure. Absolutely.
So there was no context, I guess, in which to function. So I felt like an outsider, absolutely, from the beginning. So did you feel that way, even coming from knowing more about his culture from the beginning?
I don't think I ever really felt like an outsider. I had felt like an outsider in India when I first moved, because, I didn't know the language at that point, and I didn't know, I was just trying to figure all those things out and trying to walk that tight balance of accommodating the culture, but yet still retaining who I was at the same time, and recognizing that I would never become Indian, no matter how much I tried or how much, and that wasn't even the goal anyway, was never to become Indian. But it's a funny thing actually, because in India, especially for women, for foreign women, there's kind of like this pressure to, you should do this and you should do this. People want to make you into this like nice little Indian woman, but no matter what you do, you will never be that. So I kind of accepted that from an early phase of, I'm never going to, my skin tone and my background and my culture background is never going to change. And I can accommodate as much as I can, to the culture, and learn the language and learn how to make the food and wear the sari and all these things. But really, I'll never be an insider. And so I kind of accepted that even before he and I ever met. And I wasn't, by the time I had met him, I had already, was already speaking Hindi at that point pretty fluently. And I already had the wardrobe and knew all the, not all of the nuances. That's not fair to say, but, I knew how to manage, who to do pranam and namaste to, and whose feet to touch and all of these things. I kind of like walked through that world already. So by the time he and I met, I had realized that we weren't, I was really going to be more of an alongsider.
Okay. I like that.
Insider, outsider, or a by-sider, I suppose, next to cider. So I think that got resolved pretty early in our relationship. And I also never had that expectation with his family that I needed to immediately be accepted. And I know a lot of people don't have that expectation. But
how old were you when you guys met?
I was only 25 when we met.
Okay. So you were still a youngin'.
Yes.
Because I look at it like with me, I was 16 when my husband and I met. And this is something I go over in my mind, even to this day. I'm 47. It's been a really long time. Yeah. But I didn't know who I was when I fell in love with this gorgeous Indian boy that walked into the Baskin Robbins. So, I got thrown, I sort of went into, I fell in the rabbit hole. I went into this crazy upside down world that, first of all, I had no idea who I was. And then there I was with everybody saying, well, okay, once we got married, oh, you have to learn how to cook, you have to learn how to dress, you have to learn the language, the religion. And then they would turn around and say, well, but you're trying to be like us and we don't like that, so we don't want you around. And so that kind of does a number on your sense of identity.
Oh.
So it sounds like you had it together a whole lot more than I did.
I wouldn't say I had it together at all. I think I had, but that's so hard. I mean, being so young and trying to, figure out all of those cues and all of those when you are still figuring out who you are and who you're going to be. But there's also something really amazing about that, where you're figuring that out together as I guess you were friends first and eventually became a couple. But like, how do you figure out your identity as a couple? And one thing that's always been interesting for us is we almost created a third culture early on.
Okay.
We're not going to be totally Indian. We're not going to be totally Midwestern American. Mm-hmm. We're going to be a kind of a blend, and it's going to be something else. So if we put it in either of these boxes, we're going to be disappointing somebody.
Right.
So I think that's kind of where we fell is, we have to create something different, and it might be completely uniquely for us and it might not be replicatable, and I'm sure you guys have, how have you and Dharmesh walked through that of creating your own culture?
We have done it very dysfunctionally, I think.
I think we probably all have.
Oh, yeah. Because, one of the things, I don't know about you, but I generalize with a lot of women that I know, young girls, is you go into a marriage or a relationship and think, oh, I love him, he's so wonderful, but I'm going to change him. This is going to change. This can't keep going on. And it may not be a conscious thing, but I think that that's a tendency for a lot of women, and I'm guilty of that. And I think he kind of wanted to change certain things about me. So since we were so young, we didn't go into it with that sort of conscious, okay, we're going to create our own culture. It was just, hey, we're going to be married. We're in love. Love can conquer all. And then we tackled things when they were thrown at us. So, I guess maybe that's just our personalities too, just kind of, going, running the gambit. But as far as culture, since we live here in the South, we don't have a lot of Indian culture in our lives because our community, we live in a really rural, mostly white county. And we don't have a lot of involvement with the Indian community, mainly because at the beginning I wasn't accepted. And so, we started having our kids and I was just like, well, I don't want to go to this function. They're not going to be nice to me.
Sure.
And that's not the case now at all. Lovely people in the community, but years go by and it is what it is.
Right.
So, but how did you guys consciously make those choices with things in your life, in your family, to make it that blend?
Well, we've been married for almost 10 years.
Okay.
Our first 6 years of marriage were in the U.S. and our last 3 ongoing, now 4 years have now been in India, in Bihar, where my husband grew up, which I guess, we tried to surround ourselves with people who, if they weren't Indian, we found people that were interested in India. And so, because that was just such a part of our lives and our story, and just people who had kind of a multicultural background, and that a lot of our friends were cross-cultural couples, different flavors and different combinations, or just people who had lived abroad or were international students, like from China or Saudi Arabia or wherever.
Oh,
and so
fantastic.
we kind of we just kind of formed this community around us, or just, it wasn't intentional. It just kind of happened. And
you gravitate toward people that you feel comfortable with and have that commonality with. Yeah.
Sure.
Did you have any couples or people that you knew in his family or your family that had married cross-culturally, especially Indian and an American? Because we didn't have any role models, no one to talk to about it.
Right. Well, in my family, I didn't really have anyone that had married cross-culturally. However, my family was very open to that. I think since I was a young person, since I was probably 9 or 10 years old, they figured that I would end up overseas somewhere.
Wow.
I just my dad's an international business person, and I was always asking questions, and I grew up hearing him on the phone at 3 a.m, talking to Mr. Kim in Korea, and, going every couple of months to Slovenia or wherever. He was just constantly on the go. And I grew up kind of having an understanding that people from different cultures had a lot to offer, and that there was a big world out there. So I felt that I didn't necessarily have a lot of cross-cultural interactions myself as a child. I grew up actually in a pretty white suburban community of Chicago. But my family was very open. And I guess, and with all my interactions in India, and I had gone to live there for several years, I had kind of, groomed them for that possibility. I guess that sounds negative, but I had kind of prepared them for that possibility that, my life would be heading in a different direction. So,
So they were prepared. They had seen everything so far. Yeah. That's good. That's good.
And in Abhishek's family, this is actually really a great story. So his, most of the people in his family have had arranged marriages, and he's, from what we call a transnational family, right? So he's got people who are in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India, the US, just kind of all over the place, like some of his core family members. So his folks, basically have not lived anywhere besides this state of Bihar. So they're very, I am so blessed with my in-laws. They're very traditional, but they're very understanding. And that's taken them, they've been through on their own journey. But we know that family is not, in Indian families especially, it's not just your nuclear family. It's not just your parents and your siblings.
Yeah. So that was a huge adjustment for me. So you'll definitely have to tell me how you adjusted to that.
We had, so in his larger family, we have people who are kind of settled all over. His sister's in Canada. So our uncle, or Abhishek's uncle, had settled in New York. I don't know. I guess it must be almost 50 years now.
Oh, wow.
Back in I think he was in the 60s or maybe late 60s. I'm not sure. And he kind of settled his family over there. And because of that, a lot of Abhishek's parents and other relatives had been exposed to some of Western culture, or just the understanding of how life was there. So that was a positive thing. And in some ways, I think it was negative because some of those stereotypes came through. However, one of Abhishek's cousins, one of his older cousins, the patriarch of the family, got married to a wonderful white American man. And everyone was so happy for her.
Wow.
And this is the patriarch of the family who's basically, granting this. And they had this lovely, amazing Hindu wedding in New York. And then they also had a wedding in the ancestral village way out in the boonies of Bihar. I'm like,
wow.
I still, if you're listening, my cousins, I really need to talk to you about your experience, because this is just, I can't believe that we go from New York to the village. But
yeah, that's like completely different sides of the universe.
It is. So anyhow, so that was a huge door open. And actually at their wedding, Abhishek looked over at his cousin, and his cousin's like, I guess we can marry whoever we want now.
That's awesome.
Which isn't entirely true, but that was a huge open door for us. And actually he and I had just started talking at that point. Mm-hmm. So we waited a while to kind of, we waited for the right time to talk to his family. And I think one of the terrible things is that I think for Western women and Indian guys, there tends to be this tension of, I don't want to tell my parents about you
yes.
yet. Mm-hmm. And that can be really hurtful, I think, for a lot of Western women or women who come from non-shame-based cultures.
Right.
Where it's like, why don't you want to tell them about me? Right.
Mm-hmm. Well, is there something wrong with me? Are you ashamed of me?
Yeah. And it's like, no, actually, if we want this to go right, I have to wait for the right timing, which just doesn't make sense to us. Right. But in this case, we had to wait for the right timing. So it was after, this cousin's wedding, and it went beautifully, and everyone just obviously loves them, and they're just fantastic people. So everyone loves them and was so happy. And, they got to see this American dude in the village just doing all these really archaic old type of traditions. And everyone was so happy.
He's such a good sport.
He was amazing. And then after that experience, we thought, after that all goes, that might be the right time to say, hey, by the way, Mommy, Papa, there's somebody that I want to tell you about.
Yes. Let me tell you.
Yeah. So we wanted that to be fresh in their mind. And I think that was a huge help. And then for women, the standard is definitely different, right? Like you have to, there's a lot of expectations to kind of be subservient, and you have to, kind of be the household servant sometimes. And so all of those things, you kind of have to go through this testing process to see if you're able to do that. And if you're going to be good, not just for your husband, but for the whole family. So basically, from the beginning, it was, Mommy, Papa, I have somebody, and I'm serious about her, because there's no idea of, at least in my in-laws family, there's still not this idea of dating culture. It's like, you've got someone and you get married.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
We had to wait till we were quite serious about each other to reveal that I existed, because otherwise it would be like, well, what are you going to wait around for? You want to get married or not?
Talk about pressure.
Right. It was kind of this this nexus of how serious are we about our relationship, but are we willing to let it go if everyone is against it? Or are we willing to count the losses if it's really going to cause a lot of heartache and pain for us for the rest of our lives? And so that was kind of the point that we were at, of either we're going to go forward with this, or it's all going to end.
Yeah. Yikes. We did go through that, only it wasn't as calculated as yours. It was I think I was a senior in high school, and we're sitting in the car out in front of my house. And it was sort of that discussion, okay, either I'm telling him, either you're going to tell your parents about me or we're done. And he's like, well, okay, we're done. Because he of course we got back together a week later, but it's just so much pressure for the Indian person in the family, from their family, about the expectations and not wanting to disappoint. And I don't know about for you, I guess because you lived in Indian culture, you knew more about it. I kept asking him and asking myself, well, why can't you just do what you want to do? You're an adult. Right. I couldn't understand that. My head was just not going to grasp that. So that was always tough. But it sounds like you have a better foot on the Indian ground than I did.
So. Yeah, which sometimes takes away all my excuses, though. And if I mess up, it's like, you should know better. But right. Again, I'm not an insider. I'll never be an insider. And so sometimes people still give me those excuses, let me take my excuses when I mess up.
So it doesn't sound like you had to, and correct me if I'm wrong, like force yourself into a category to try to change to please people. Because this is something you chose. You knew what you were getting into a great deal. As a blogger and podcaster and a writer, I get people sending me messages, emails, asking me advice. Oh, I'm married to an Indian guy, or I'm dating an Indian guy and his parents want me to do this, or how much am I supposed to change for them to accept me? Mm-hmm. So do you get messages like that from people?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what do you say? Because it's so hard because, you're living your life in your context. I'm living my life in my context. Everybody's so different. So what kind of advice do you give to people?
Yeah, it's hard because the standards for women, it's like on one hand, I want to be like a stark feminist and be like, to change for anybody. They accept you the way you are, Yeah. And on the other hand, I want to be honoring of Indian culture and of the background and history of what that means. And so I usually encourage people that, to try to accommodate in some ways. And again, like it is going to feel like a slippery slope. Like, well, if I do this and they're going to want me to do this and they're going to want me to do this and they're going to want me to do this. Yeah. Well, they might, but you can also always, put your foot down at some point. And, if they want you to wear bangles and put on mehendi and if they want you to learn how to cook something, or if they want you to come to some event and, wear the sari and sit there and look pretty, like, why not?
Right.
But, why not? Or, and learn a few phrases in whatever your spouse's native language or whatever their family's native language. It's like, why not?
Yeah.
Some of these little things go a long way, but I guess what I would say is if you are willing to adjust and accommodate in some of the small things, you'll gain ground and you'll gain the permission to kind of put your foot down when the big things come along.
Yes, that's absolutely right. It's creating goodwill.
Exactly.
And one thing I'd tell people, they'll ask me, well, do you wear the Indian clothes? And, do you do what your mother-in-law says and that sort of thing? Or what do you do about religion with raising your kids? I don't like this tradition about Hindu culture. So should I do it or not? And I tell people, don't change yourself for your husband or your in-laws. Change things about you if you're comfortable with it. And if you're marrying somebody that's Indian or a different culture, there's a reason that you were attracted to that person in the first place. And that culture is a big part of them. So give it a fair shake.
Yeah.
So you're so immersed in the culture, and I am so not, but I have so many aspects of it that have molded my life.
Yes. Yeah.
What is the biggest impact that Indian culture has had on your life in a good way? Or is there one thing?
Impact. Yeah. I don't know if there's one thing. I mean, I recently told Abhishek that something is changing in me, and I don't think it's ever going to go back to the way that I don't think I'm ever going to go back to the way that I was.
Oh, wow.
And this is after, I've been involved in Indian culture now for like 13 years since I lived in India. And it was, this year particularly, I felt something shifting in me.
Oh.
And I'm like, it was a little scary because I felt a part of myself being lost, my Americanness being lost. And I saw it kind of slipping away from me, and I was adopting a new way of thinking, and it felt very permanent to me. And I don't know if that's just because we don't visit the U.S. often, or I'm not sure why, and I don't exactly know what it was that was changing. But I'll probably be able to reflect in 10 years about that.
Right.
But I do think that, once you're immersed in the culture, there's so many things that do change about you, things that you consciously changed and things that you unconsciously change. And,
right.
The conscious things you can change are learning the language and learning to eat, eating Indian food and, making decisions, thinking about, I'm going to show up. The invitation says 5 p.m., but I'm going to show up at 7. Consciously making those decisions, and then there's things that change unconsciously, like, oh man, that that woman said that she's not going to be able to meet me, and she's not going to be able to come to my house. She directly said, sorry, I can't make it, and I feel bad about that because you're supposed to say, oh yeah, I'll come to your house. I'll come to your house, even if you're not going to come to their house.
Right.
And I genuinely feel sad about that. I'm like, what happened to me? What's happened to me now? I used to be so direct, and now those are the things that unconsciously change. Your feelings, your underlying, just like your underlying ways of emoting and ways of navigating. And I think I would say, if I had to give an answer, I think I would say that, just like my entire worldview about people and why people are motivated about things. And it's for me, it's actually, I think, kind of the core of my worldview is kind of morphed. And that can be a very deconstructive type of thing and scary, but also as you kind of reconstruct your worldview together, can be very positive.
Positive and enlightening, and seeing things through a completely different lens. That's exciting, actually.
Yeah.
Well, and I think also for a person, especially like a mom, you're going to change in your life anyway, because, you were a career woman, and then you were a wife, and then you're a mom, and then you have these struggles. So, regardless of where you are, it's going to change. You just have a little bit more of a drastic change because of your locale and the culture that you're in. And I can tell you, I'm older than you, and you're going to be a completely different person in 10 years and then 20 years. And that's a great thing. We grow so much. So
for sure.
That's great. So your podcast, it's called Invisible India.
Yeah.
What's your goal for that? How did you get started with that?
Yeah, well, this is really just a hobby. We have a lot of other work that we're doing here. We're involved in nonprofit work, and we have a small business we're starting. And those are the things that kind of, sustain us and pay the bills. But one of the things that we found is a lot of people were really interested in what we're doing and interested about our lives and Indian culture and our perspective and how we've navigated East and West. And I think that some of the ways that we are discovering different aspects of India through the perspective of a foreigner who's kind of adapted to Indian culture, and then a returning NRI, which NRI is a non-resident Indian. So he was abroad for several years and then came back. And people, I think, are really interested in that perspective. Like, how do you think India's changed? How have you changed? How have you been able to raise your kids there? And so that's some of the things we like to talk about. Our goal, I think, is just to educate and inform and have a dialogue with people. And as we discover this subcontinent and its massive, quickly changing landscape, yet fiercely traditional landscape at the same time. So how do we do life here, and how do we work with those changes and the things that are happening here? So one of the topics we talk about are raising kids, and we talk a lot about women and men's roles, like gender roles. We talk about different things that are happening in India, different stereotypes, misconceptions, and how we found those to be true or untrue.
That's great. To be able to create a dialogue is just so important, because I think people here don't know anything about Indian culture. When I tell somebody that my husband is Indian, they look at me sometimes and go, "Oh, yeah, I like Indian food." That's their only context with it.
I've seen the Jungle Book. It's like, oh goodness.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that creating a dialogue about all of that is really great. And that's one of the reasons I do this podcast, is just to get people's stories out there, because if you don't know someone, you're going to look at them and say, oh, they're different from me. I'm not going to like you. That's what people tend to do. But just getting stories and talking about people and to people is so important in this world today.
Definitely.
What do you have on the horizon for the podcast? Do you have any good upcoming episodes?
Yeah, I've been working on bringing some expert guests on.
Okay.
So I've done a few interviews with different people who work with different nonprofit organizations and things like that, who are really involved in the front lines of social change. So I had one interview with a lady that I know here who is involved in gender violence projects. Okay. And so interviewed her, and that was like, I felt one of the best episodes. I have a few people on the horizon that are international researchers or doing their PhD. I have a few just really interesting guests. One guy who is a cultural intelligence expert. Oh. And hoping to get him scheduled. He's said yes. Now we just need to get the dates figured out. So I think by the end of the year, I think we'll have some of these released. So I'm really excited about just getting more experts on Indian culture and people that come from this perspective, from a cross-cultural perspective. Yeah. And I think that we need to get more, I would like to kind of take it in a more direction where we're talking about social issues and some of the things that cause conflict or debate.
Yeah, excellent. I'm looking forward to listening to more of those, because listening to your podcast and talking to you really gives me a new perspective on the things that I go through in my life, because I do have a little bit more of a reason for why, this has happened or this person has said this. It just gives you a wider context. So that's great. Well, I look forward to hearing more on your podcast, and I look forward to talking to you more about some different things. I'd love to hear, at a later time, maybe what it's like to raise kids in India, the difference between that and the U.S. And you've got little kids, and I've got
5 and 2.
Yeah, so I could even give you a little bit of advice if you need.
Yes, please.
I've been through it all.
Well, on some of your episodes, I've enjoyed listening to your son leaving for college and your daughter being out of the house. That's been really encouraging to me, and to be able. And one thing, actually, on one of your recent episodes with Sheryl, I think he was talking about him and his wife and the phase that they're in right now. Of you have to do some things to kind of keep that romance alive, and realizing that this is a phase. The house always smells like poop, and this is a phase, and that just touched my heart, and I have been holding on to that for the last couple of weeks. Of yes, that is the phase I'm in. Yes, and it's this reality. So
yep, and you need to hear from old people that yes, it will pass. So I definitely can give you that. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here to talk with me. I really appreciate everything.
Thank you so much. I was really looking forward to this and just getting to speak with you, and I really enjoy your podcast. I really think that it's an important voice that you have, and I think that there's just a lot of discovery that needs to be done from so many different perspectives, and I just appreciate what you're doing.
Well, thank you. And likewise. So I hope to have you on here again. I definitely would love to talk to you again.
Thank you. I would love to.
Thank you. this podcast so far, please continue following along by tapping the subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts. If you really liked it, go on, be awesome, and leave a rating and a review. Find me on all social media too by searching Sheryl with an S, Parbhoo, that's Parbhoo. Thanks for listening to Southern Life, Indian Wife.
Hi, it's Jamie, Progressive's Employee of the Month, 2 months in a row. Leave a message at the... Hi, Jamie. It's me, Jamie. I just had a new idea for our song about the Name Your Price tool. So when it's like, tell us what you want to pay, hey, 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 and the trombone goes, blah, 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 and you say, we'll help you find coverage options to fit your budget. Then we just all do finger snaps while a choir goes, savings coming at ya, savings coming at ya. Yes? No? Maybe? Anyway, see your practice tonight. I got new lyrics for the rap break.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.